Welcome to the Macdownunder Podcast for all Australian Apple computer enthusiasts and collectors.
Welcome to episode 35 of the Macdownunder Podcast. I'm Justin, and thanks for joining me today and to continue our journey on Apple's external storage devices. Thanks for everyone that watched the last two episodes. We've covered off the 5.25 and the 3.5 inch disk drives, or floppy disk drives so far, and they seem to have been really popular, so I hope you enjoyed them. Today, we're going to have a look at Apple's attached external hard drives, the attached ones only today, and we'll also cover our regular collecting news, coming events, and some for sale finds. So, on to today's episode. I spoke about Apple's Twiggy drives in the past two episodes because to me they showed Apple's desire to build their own high capacity storage device. If you remember, they had plans for two versions of the Twiggy in external closures, the Unifile and the Duofile. For the Apple II, the Apple III, and of course the Twiggies were included in the Lisa and also in the very early Macintosh prototypes. Apple also created the floppy media called FileWare. They were certainly all in with these drives and the idea that these would be responsible for your files. Sadly, of course, these drives ultimately failed and were scrapped. So it's probably no great surprise that in the background, Apple were also working on a hard disk drive to store files called the Profile. Get it? Unifile, Duofile, Professional File. Finally released in September 1981, this massive unit is a 5 megabyte hard drive. It required a specialist interface card for the Apple III that allowed you to control the drive. And the unit itself was codenamed Pippin, which is a small apple. As some of you will know, I'm quite fond of the name Pippin in the Apple area because of its later connection to the game console that Apple designed. Anyway, back to the drive. It consisted of a Seagate ST506 stepper motor drive and mechanism. And of course, Apple did their usual thing and built their own digital and analog interface boards. So the interface was an 8-bit parallel interface with a DB25 connector. Here it is here. But you'll notice there's no daisy chaining. So this was a one interface card for one hard drive. It's in a beige case and it was designed to sit and match the Apple III. So if you have a look there, you can see the Apple III and the Monitor 3 and the design blends in beautifully. There was also software that you needed to run for your profile so that you had a menuing system, and that was distributed with the hard drive called Catalyst. Later, there was a 10 megabyte version of the drive available as well. Now, either of these drives will work with the Apple III interface card that I showed earlier. The main difference is the model number on the back. So on this particular drive, it's the 10 megabyte drive, so it's got the model number of A9M0100, whereas the original drives were an A9M1005, 5 and 10 megabytes. So in 1983, Apple released the interface card and software to allow your profile hard drives to work with your Apple IIe. Now, because the Apple IIe isn't as powerful as the Apple III and the input-output is slightly different, you need a specific interface card for the model of profile. So this one, with the ROM chip at number C6 being 3410271A, indicates that this is a 5 megabyte profile hard drive interface card. This other one, again with the ROM chip at C6, being part number 3410299B, that's a 10 megabyte hard drive interface card. So a bit annoying that in the Apple III you can use the one interface card for any of these drives, but in the Apple II you need to make sure you've got the appropriate firmware on your interface card. There was also an Apple II version of the Catalyst software to allow you to run a menu system for the files on the profile. And of course, as the profile is somewhat wider than your Apple II, as you can see behind, where are we? There we are, behind me there, the Apple III and the Apple II next to it, there we go. You needed the monitor stand ideally for the Monitor 3 to sit over your Apple II. It was wide enough to accommodate the profile, and then you'd put your Monitor 3 on top. Also in 1983, Apple released the Lisa, and the Lisa 1 and eventually the Lisa 2 got delivered with a profile hard drive. Even though it was designed for the Apple III, the Lisa 1 had a built-in parallel port specifically for the profile hard drive. Now, the later Lisa 2s and the Mac XLs lacked this parallel interface port because, in fact, they came with a 10 megabyte widget hard drive internally. So if you wanted to add your profile, you needed one of these parallel interface cards, which comes with 2 parallel ports. So given there's 3 interface slots in your Lisa, you could have 6 drives connected through interface cards plus a 7th if you had the built-in parallel card. So 7, potentially 10 megabyte profile hard drives. Mind you, that would cost you a pretty penny. Most users though place their profile on top, but again, if you had 7 profiles, I don't think that would have been safe. I think there would have been stacks alongside your Lisa. Now, I've got to point out that the profile is not compatible with the Macintosh. There was never an interface or software written for that. And of course, the poor old Apple IIc didn't have the right ports and couldn't be expanded either. So, maintenance and use of your profile. Well, firstly, the profile has lots of reefer caps. 5 in the most recent one we checked out at the Mac Museum, thanks to Danny and Matt. So you do need to check the power supply on your profile before you turn it on. Also, Danny, again, friend of the show and friend of the Mac Museum, has had great success with the ESP profile interface card to do diagnostics on profiles, and I believe he's resurrected almost all of his profiles using that card. So there's a tip, have a chat to the ESP profile people. But if you're reformatting the drive, you do need a special Z8 microprocessor with a piggyback firmware chip to enable the read-write on the machine. They are available, particularly on eBay US. Now, when you start your profile up, it undertakes a self-test, and you can usually hear it. It's pretty loud. The machine's pretty loud in general. And what you'll notice is that the ready light on the front of the machine will flash red. When it stops flashing, means that you've completed the self-test and it's passed. If it keeps flashing, you're in a bit of trouble because it's not completing its self-test. So as we know, in retro computing, you require a lot of patience. And so with this machine, you absolutely need to demonstrate it. So the idea is you connect your profile to your Lisa, your Apple III or your Apple II. You leave everything turned off. You turn on your profile. You wait for it to complete its self-test, so the red light becomes illuminated permanently. And then you can turn on your CPU and other accessories. If you don't do it in that sequence, then it won't boot correctly and you may well damage both your computer and the hard drive. Now, if your profile is dead, there are a couple of options for repair. So there's a commercial product called the X Profile that replaces the mechanism and uses the power supply. That's a commercial product. And there are 2 open source products. One is the Arduino file, which has been deprecated, but still available. The specifications and designs are still available. And the more recent one is the ESP profile, which I mentioned earlier, that Danny's had great success in. So all of those are available to replace the mechanism if the hard drive itself is dead, but the power supply is still working for you. Now, an extra tip, the Apple III won't boot from the profile at all. As you know, Apple IIIs are built to boot from their floppy disk. So you need the Catalyst software in the floppy disk on your Apple III before you turn the system on. However, you can get an upgraded firmware ROM that has the auto boot software in there. So that's an aftermarket product that's been produced recently. So if you're a purist, that might not be for you, but if you want to boot off your profile hard drive, then consider that option as well. In terms of collecting your profiles, well, as it happens, one's just sold on eBay in Australia last week, and it sold for $339 plus shipping. I'll put a link in the description so you can take a look at that listing. It has finished though, but that gives us an idea of the cost. I do have some in the for sale section from the US. Again, they're pretty expensive and the shipping is pretty costly as well. But you can pick them up in Australia. You've just got to be really patient and keep your eyes peeled. Now, following the development of the profile, there seems to have been quite a few other projects that Apple have tried for building their own hard drives. So there's the internal widget drive that I mentioned before for the Apple Lisa. They also tried building an internal profile drive using the same technology in the previous drive that I showed. And something I've only just discovered in the research for this show, there was a Nisha hard drive that was a 20 megabyte prototype that was built but never released into production. But all of these were based around the parallel interface and the command set that the profile hard drive introduced back in 1981. And all used the Z8 processor that I mentioned with the piggyback chip for the profile hard drive. What ultimately did get released in 1985 was the HD20 or hard disk 20, a 20 megabyte hard drive in a beige case to sit underneath your compact Mac, so specifically the 512K Macintosh, but built to match that, sit underneath it nicely and provide 20 megabytes of hard drive storage using the new hierarchical file system that we talked about in the last episode. It was developed for the 800K drives so that you could have a hierarchy in your menu system, and it was implemented as well for the HD20. So the HD20, interestingly enough, uses a special Rodime 522 mechanism that appears to have been specifically developed for Apple. And there's not a lot of information available for it pretty much anywhere. So internally, it's got a proprietary 26-pin connector, but it's definitely not SCSI. Now, the interface board inside the machine that talks to the hard drive is actually believed to be the final version of that Nisha prototype interface board. So there's some suggestion that the Nisha hard drive that Apple was building themselves wasn't up to scratch, and so I ended up going for the Rodime. But the interface card is in fact the same Nisha interface card that they had developed under the prototype. So this Nisha card includes the integrated WAS machine that we talked about last week that allows you to use the high capacity disk drives. And the old favourite, it's also got a Z8 microprocessor on board. So the standard for communicating now that Apple developed was called the Directly Connected Disk Protocol, or the DCD protocol, and it ran at 500 kilobits per second. So it's not super fast. So the HD20 comes with a DB19 cable, which plugs directly into the Macintosh's floppy port, as you can see from the icon. It also comes with a daisy chain connector on the back. And so you can connect your HD20 to your Macintosh, and then you can connect your external floppy drive into the HD20. Remembering that the Macintosh can only have one external floppy drive because there's no daisy chaining on their floppy drives, on their 400K floppy drives. Now, interestingly, the software to drive the HD20 isn't in the ROM on the Mac 128 or the Mac 512K, that 68K ROM that they have. So in order to run this hard drive, you need to boot with a floppy disk that's specifically designed to boot the HD20. So it's the HD20 startup disk. Now, a lot of people think that it's an initialization file that writes over the code of the firmware, the system firmware. It's actually an entire operating system of its own. I'll put the links down in the description where I sourced some of this information. Fantastic information from Mac GUI. With the firmware that's in this drive and the associated software, not only can you daisy chain to a 400k drive, you can daisy chain to an 800k drive without needing the 128k ROM in your Mac 512. In fact, you can daisy chain multiple HD20s, and there's reports of someone that's got at least 3 connected to their Mac 512. So eventually, when the Mac 128k ROM was released for the Mac 512KE that came with the 800k disk drive and the Mac Plus and everything since that, then the HD20 can boot automatically through that firmware. Even the original Mac 128k with a modified version of the HD startup disk can boot HD20. Mind you, there's not a lot of RAM left once you do that to do anything useful, but it can be done. You can also upgrade the ROMs on your 128k Mac if you wish, so that you can boot directly off the HD20. But again, that's adulterating your Mac 128. If you're a purist, you probably don't want to do that. And even then, you still haven't got a lot of RAM left to run the software and multiple files that the HD20 can provide. So the HD20 was a Mac-specific device. It can't be used with the Apple II, the Apple III, or the Lisa. So running and maintaining your HD20, just like the profile, the HD20 does its own self-test on boot up. So again, you leave everything turned off, you connect your HD20 to your Macintosh, and you turn the HD20 on first, and just like the profile, the ready light on the front, which is green in this case, above the Apple logo, will flash during the self-test and go solid green when it's passed the self-test. So again, you need to be patient, boot the hard drive first, wait for it to complete the self-test, and then you can turn on your CPU and any accessories. Now, power supplies will potentially need maintenance. However, our friends at Mac GUI, with some great information, have suggested if you don't need to take it apart, don't. It's quite a complicated procedure, but if you have to, they've got instructions on how to do that. They also talk about a hidden diagnostics menu that's available in the HD20 self-test that allows you to actually drill right down and right to the individual bits on the platter, which is a great idea. And in fact, there's a great description, again linked down in the description for this video, on how someone managed to get their non-booting HD20 repaired in that firmware, in that very low-level formatting process. Not for the faint of heart, I suspect, but if you're in trouble, then there are some guides to support you. Now, if these drives are dead, the floppy EMU is a good option to either build into the hard drive or to replace the hard drive altogether. Now, in terms of collecting, the HD20, quite topical just at the moment. So in the Vintage Apple and Macintosh Enthusiasts of Australia group on Facebook, just this last week, there happened to be a conversation about the value of some of these machines, including the HD20. And the suggestion is a range somewhere between 125 and 225 Australian dollars, depending on condition. So they do come up from time to time. It looks like from this thread that there might be one available soon. In fact, it might have already been sold by now. But again, be patient, keep your eyes peeled, and potentially check overseas. So move along to September 1986, and alongside the release of the Apple II GS, Apple released the 20SC, Apple's first SCSI hard drive, that's Small Computer Systems Interface, which is a new standard that Apple adopted. The first 20SC originally contained a half-height 5¼ Seagate hard drive. It's quite big and occupies most of the case. Again, it was a 20 megabyte hard drive. It was the ST225N. Later on, they replaced that larger internal hard drive with a smaller 3.5 inch mini scribe 20 megabyte SCSI hard drive instead. The case is very reminiscent of the HD20 and again is designed to sit underneath a compact Mac or alongside your Apple II GS, but it's now in the Snow White design language with the Snow White grooves. On the back, however, what we've now got is two 50-pen Centronics interfaces, which was pretty standard for SCSI, which allowed you to daisy chain. In fact, you could daisy chain up to 6 devices under the SCSI protocol. But what you did need was a SCSI identifier that was unique for each device. So there's also the identifier and the pinhole to be able to change that number. You also, with SCSI, of course, we needed the numbers and also needed the external terminators at the beginning and the end of the SCSI chain. That's a whole other subject to talk about. We could talk forever about SCSI issues. We won't do that today. Under the SCSI protocol and the implementation that Apple used, we could now move up to 1.25 megabytes per second, significantly faster than the earlier drive, certainly faster than the HD20 operating through the floppy port. The SC20 came in 2 colours. This one, which I think is beige, to sit underneath the beige Mac Plus, but it also came in platinum, the first platinum hard drive to go alongside your Apple II GS. And of course, later, compact Macs like the Mac Plus when it went to platinum, the SE, SE30 and so forth. So you could use your 20SC with any Macintosh that had SCSI, so the Mac Plus onwards. To use this with your Apple IIe, you needed one of 2 SCSI cards. Either the original Apple SCSI card, this is a revision A, although the most common one is the revision C, or the later high-speed SCSI card, and here's an example of that. You couldn't use it with your Apple III, sadly. You couldn't use it with your Lisa or your Apple IIc, which lacked SCSI. So after the original launch of the 20SC without any markings, later on Apple released a range of SCSI hard drives. So the 20SC with the markings, the 40SC with its marking, the 80SC and the 160SC. So a range of SCSI hard drives available. Now, in terms of collecting, again, just this last weekend, there was a discussion about the 40SC. And the suggestion for the 40SC is that it could range anywhere between $150 and $250, depending on its condition. Apparently, the 40SC is considered to be pretty rare. I've got to tell you, the 160SC, I waited a very long time to get from the United States. In terms of running and maintenance, Apple still recommended in the manual for the 20SC that you turn your hard drive on first before anything else and wait 10 seconds for it to complete its startup process. So even with these SCSI hard drives that were considered to be much more modern, you still needed to wait 10 seconds before you turned on your CPU. Now, what I need to point out is none of the hard drives we've talked about so far, the Profile, the HD20, or the SCSI drives, none of these were hot swappable, which meant that if you tried plugging and unplugging when the computer's on or the machine is or the hard drive is turned on, you do risk damaging both the CPU and the device. So that's worth keeping in mind, particularly when you're doing maintenance. The cases of this era, as you can see, suffer from yellowing. So it is a bit hard to tell which one's a beige and which one's a platinum, to be quite honest, in these. And the plastics get very brittle. And I think you can see that we've got some fading here from stickers. And I think we can see that there's some cracks on some of the cases as well. Most of the SCSI drives in these enclosures will have failed by now. Some people have had success replacing the rubber buffers inside the hard drives, but it's not for the faint of heart. You do need a clean room, which is dust-free, and you do need to pull the drive apart in that clean room and replace or repair the rubber buffers. It's usually turned to goo and got stuck. So even those repairs aren't long term. So again, not for the faint of heart and pretty much just for data recovery. It's unlikely, you would not want to use one of those drives for long-term production use. If you've got a failed hard drive, of course, there's lots of modern alternatives to build into your SC cases. So Zulu SCSI, Blue SCSI are both popular replacements for SCSI hard drives in these devices, or just as a complete replacement. The power supplies in these are also quite old. They'll also need some repair, likely recapping and cleaning. So moving forward to the 1990s, and Apple started selling rebadged LaCie hard drives like this one, all under the model number of M2115, regardless of the capacity. They range from the original 160 megabyte, which actually had a label on it. I believe the 850 also had a label of it, but I can't find any photos of that just at the moment. But they also had a 1 gigabyte, a 2.1 gigabyte, a 3.2 gigabyte, which is what this one has, 4.3, 6 and 9 gigabytes. So quite a wide range in these LaCies. Now, how do you know it's a LaCie? Well, in mine, it's a bit of a giveaway because it actually says it's manufactured by LaCie along with the capacity on the base. But again, all under the model number M2115. So like these other drives, they come with the two 50-pin Centronics connectors because it is a SCSI hard drive. The power supply, of course, but of note is the SCSI identifier, which sits under this little hood here, and you can adjust it with the two switches. So with the return of Steve Jobs to Apple in the late 1990s, Steve condensed the product range that Apple was putting out. So of course, he cancelled all sorts of products, which included the external hard drive enclosures, leaving that for third parties to take care of. But much more recently, in 2003, to support Apple's Xserve line of commercial servers, Apple introduced the Xserve RAID, an enormous beast that weighs a ton. It came in the same aluminium styling as the Xserve with lots of blinking lights. It's rack mountable and 3 units high. It comes with 14 hot swappable Ultra ATA drives. So of course you can pull them in and reinsert them fairly simply. And again, hot swappable finally. So it came with dual independent RAID controllers. Each RAID controller controlled 7 of the drives. Each of those controllers had its own fibre channel port, its own DB9 serial port to connect to the UPS, and a 100 base T Ethernet port for remote management. It also came with 2 power supplies and 2 backup batteries as well. So these beasties could run a whole range of RAID configurations, so completely redundant from a power supply point of view, from a battery backup point of view, and running RAID also redundant in terms of the individual modules that could be hot swapped if failed or if you needed to upgrade the machine. So a tremendous machine. They came in a number of models. So the first build from 2003 to 2004, there were actually 4 models produced during that period. And they came with a high-speed serial data connector, which was the on launch for fibre channel, and originally supported 180 gigabyte disk drives. In 2004 to late 2004, there was the small form factor pluggable model. Now this had the SPF style connector, which was again hot swappable for fibre connection, and they could take 180 gigabyte hard drives, but also the 250 gigabyte hard drives. This final model, part number A1009, built in late October 2004 through to February 2008, so quite a period, came with a 2 gigabyte fibre channel throughput, but could support up to 1 terabyte hard drives in each slot. Now this one only comes with 400 megabyte hard drives across the 14 slots. That's more than enough, and mind you, they drain a lot of power. So if you're going to run one of these, just be aware they drain an awful amount of power. They were discontinued in February 2008. Now, I'm aware that Apple made other external hard drives, for example, the time capsules. I'm going to cover those at a future date when we talk about Apple's networking products. So, have you got any Apple external attached hard drive devices in your collection? Which ones? How many? Which one's your favourite? Let us know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. On to recent news. And first up, some sad news that the 68K Macintosh Liberation Army forums have been down for a few days. So I hope the administrators are all okay and not too stressed if they're trying to get things back up and running at the moment. Next up, Macdownunder continues, at least for a little while, and I'll put a link down in the description to the Tinker Different forum that's capturing all the projects that are running around the world for Macdownunder this year. Apple's also announced worldwide events for its 50th anniversary. I'll put a link down in the description to the Apple site. But in Australia, Apple are celebrating by illuminating the Sydney Opera House sales with digital artwork from the 25th of March, so last night, through to the 27th of March this year, right now. The Illuminating Creativity, they're calling it, projection features works created by Australian artists using Procreate and the iPad. So make sure you check it out if you're in or around Sydney, or maybe check the news, link down in the description to the 9 News site where I source this information. On to coming events, and technology markets have got 2 markets that they've advertised upcoming. The first is on Sunday the 12th of April at the Darebin Sports Stadium in Reservoir, and the second is on Sunday the 19th of April at the Springers Leisure Centre in Keysborough. Link down in the description. The Adelaide Retro Computing Group meeting. Their next meeting is on Friday the 10th of April, as usual in the Unley Community Centre. Again, link down in the description. The Retro Gaming Bendigo Group, again, have their second meeting for March on Sunday the 29th of March, remembering that they've moved to the Huntly Memorial Hall on the Midland Highway in Huntly. Again, links down in the description. WasFest 43, coming up on the 28th of March, again being held in a private home, but this one's to celebrate Apple's 50th anniversary. Again, links down in the description. Make sure you reach out to the organisers to get the details. And the Mac Museum is open each Saturday for the rest of March. Again, Little Bird suggests that they're not open over Easter. So watch the Mac Museum website for further details. So for this week's for sale section, I've looked out for Apple external hard drives. And as I mentioned, there's some recent sales that have been completed and lots of chatter about values. So to find a few things to talk about here, I did have to look overseas a little bit. So first up, we have an Xserve RAID individual drive module. This one's the 1 terabyte, the largest version that they made. Now this one is available in Victoria for $80. Next up, another Xserve RAID module. This one's a 500 gigabyte version, available again in Victoria for $100. Next up, we have an Apple III Profile hard drive controller card. So this is for your Apple III to connect to a Profile hard drive. Now this one's from the United States, and wait for it, the price is $547 American, which comes in at around $783 Australian, plus about $43 shipping. So link down in the description if you're interested in this one. I've got to say though, one did sell in the US just recently in January for $178. So there are cheaper ones around, but you'll need to be patient. Next up, we have the Apple Macintosh HD20. This is the one that plugs into the disk drive port of your compact Mac. This one's from an estate sale, and it's currently at US dollars 443, so coming in at Australian $633 plus another $90 shipping. Next up, we have an original Apple II SCSI interface card. So this is the version C card. It's at 179 US. That's around $283 Australian, plus about $110 shipping. So again, even the interface cards these days are quite expensive. If you're looking for the Apple high-speed SCSI interface card for the Apple II, so this is the more desirable one. This one's at US $192, so coming in at about $275 Australian, and again about $54 shipping. Again, links down in the description. If you're interested in an Apple 20SC, so this is the SCSI drive. This is the cheapest one I found from the US, and I've got to say it's pretty beaten up and it's untested. But it is for only 87 American dollars, so 125 Australian dollars plus about $85 for shipping. Now, I've also found a 40SC online in the US at about the same price. So they all run at about the same price in the US. Mind you, I haven't seen an 80SC, and the only 160SC is the one that I purchased last year. And next up is the vintage M2115. This is the last C manufactured Apple external hard drive. This one's the case only, but a lot of them have failed and you need to replace the drive anyway. This one comes in at $109 American, about $157 Australian, and another $59 shipping on top of that. Well, that brings us to the end of episode 35 of the Macdownunder podcast and our discussion about Apple's attached external hard drives. Please let me know what you thought down in the comments. I'm planning to cover Apple's other attached external storage devices next week, so tape drives and CD drives and so forth. What do you think about that? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. And don't forget to come down and visit at the Mac Museum this Saturday from 10 until 2. Again, probably not over Easter. But thanks again for joining me today, and until I see you next time, take care. Thank you for joining the Macdownunder podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again soon.